time. So good morning, everyone, and thanks for participating to this breakout session. Um, I am very pleased to introduce you my colleague Enrique Claverol, who is a program manager at the European Innovation Council and is dedicated to the area of medical technologies and devices. So Enrique is a very nice colleague to work with, first of all, but
Very
he's a
nice of you.
medical
Thank you.
he's a medical engineering by training. He has extended experience in academia, in the industry, was a founder of a spin-off company. And his mission in EIC is to really help bringing revolutionary products to patients. So it's quite an ambitious goal. So he is in charge of this very interesting challenge that he thought about, which is towards the healthcare continuum technologies to support a radical shift from episodic to continuous healthcare. So he's in charge of managing the portfolio of projects that will be generated from this challenge, and also of projects that have been founded in the med tech field since the start of EIC. So I now give the floor to Enrique, who is going to introduce you to this challenge. And I kindly remind you that we will be answering to your questions at the end of Enrique's presentation. You are kindly asked to submit your question via Slido. So I can see that we have already some there, which is very good. It's like you can type directly your question on the white panel on the right of your screen, or using an application, slido.com, with the hashtag EIC Pathfinder. So Enrique, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you. So the first slide was just about Slido, I suppose you managed to get in there. Um, First real slide is a bit of a summary of the structure of my slide deck. I will review very quickly some of the messages that were given by colleagues before about European Innovation Council, because I thought this was relevant to help you frame your proposal in a way that is aligned with our thinking. The concept of the challenge, some of this was described already, but I thought, again, we could refine it a bit in the context of this particular breakout session. And then more specifically about the health continuum call. So first, as my colleagues described, the agency was created very recently, last year in April. And the main message I wanted to convey to you, which again, I think might help you approach correctly your proposal. Remember that the EIC has been created to create technologies, bring them to market, and to create and grow global startups. This is our main reason for our existence, to create the companies that bring new solutions to the clinic, to patients, and they become from Europe. This is always in our horizon. And the way we implement this, again, we've seen some of this before. We implement this with a three-stage funding pipeline. Pathfinder is where the early stage ideas are created. I will describe a bit better what I mean by this in a second. And then what we expect at the end of Pathfinder is that you achieve a proof of concept version of the device or the system. A POC typically, in my mind, for medtech, is an ugly version of something that works. But you have on the bench that has been hand soldered, maybe that it's a first version of the software or algorithms, and you run it on some real data, and it shows that the core technology works. It's probably safe, although of course you cannot validate it fully. This is kind of an early version of the system, and this is a POC. And then we provide bridge funding that we call transition, so that you can polish this POC and make it, let's call it, an investable technology. So we understand that at the end of Pathfinder, you cannot have a product that an investor or an industrial partner could invest in, but it has to be the core technology that works already. And transition, what comes next, and we will be very happy to inject you into transition as soon as possible, is kind of the start of the fast way to market, where we provide an additional couple 2.5 million euros and 2-3 additional years for you to polish it, and then when it's ready to be shown to investors and industrial partners here at the end of transition, you can go into accelerator. And again, accelerator provides an additional 2.5 million grant, but also up to 15 million equity investment. Here the company is growing very fast. But our focus today is Pathfinder, but you see the Pathfinder is the starting engine for everything that comes later. And this is the main message I wanted to convey to you. Although you can go into accelerator later on from outside, we've designed this pipeline starting at Pathfinder. So some of our projects, we hope many, as the agency evolves in time, should come Pathfinder as the engine that creates the core technologies. So again, since we are here as an agency to create companies and bring solutions to patients, we look at how many technologies we invent in Pathfinder, how many of them really transition to the clinic. So if they don't really go to hospitals or to patients, these do not fulfill what we're trying to do. Um, and we measure how many companies are being created that become, global leaders. And so that constrains a little bit how we think in terms of Pathfinder. It's a low technology readiness level, so that's okay. That's why it's a starting point of the funding pipeline. But at the same time, we try to make sure this is not the place to do basic science, simply because of the limitations, of the constraints given by the goals we have. So if we want to go to market to the patient within a reasonable amount of time, and of course it's difficult to define reasonable, but if we want to achieve that, we have to be very careful. So Pathfinder is about developing the technology and not about performing basic science. But I will describe this in a future slide more clearly. Um, so there's limited room for exploratory basic research. This is not the place for exploratory basic research. Okay, so I go deeper into the challenges, the general concept of the challenge. And I want to start with an example. And I was a bit hesitant to give you this example. I didn't want to choose an example that was perfectly within the call, because then I would bias you in favor of this area. But the risk is that you might be confused because this example is not for this call. So I want to make this very clear. This is an example to show the kind of opportunities we're looking for in Pathfinder, but this is not an example you need to copy for this call. It's not relevant for this call. So in 2002, some people were interested in phototaxis in algae. They wanted to see why some algae would move towards or away from light sources. So they knew there was a protein that if it was knocked out, the algae were not moving towards light. But if the protein was there, algae did phototaxis. They approach light. And of course, when the protein was expressed, the biophysicists discovered in 2002 that this was really a membrane ion channel that had a rhodopsin. And with light, it was open or closed. In this case, it was open. And that change in membrane electrical potential made the algae responsive to light. So that was basic research. Nagel and Heckman, they were just investigating phototaxis in algae. That was a step one, if you want, of this process. And this is clearly not suitable for an EIC Pathfinder project. This was basic science, that could be funded by us under other programs, but it's not really the spirit of Pathfinder. But then there was a step two. So this happened in 2002. And 3 years after that, there was a technology development. So 2002 opened an opportunity that was captured within 3 years very quickly. And the opportunity, of course, is you can express that ion channel that's light sensitive in neurons in mammals. And if you do that, you have invented a new technology. It's called optogenetics, and it's booming. It's been booming for the last few years. So when you express that channel, you can use light, and to use light, you can develop a device that can be implanted, or it can be a light source external to the bit of tissue you want to illuminate, and you can use um, uh, viral vector technologies to express those light sensitive channels in the target mammalian brain. And so when our colleagues realized in 2002 that the channel rhodopsin was discovered in algae, immediately that opened an opportunity for technology development. And this technology is being used in life sciences, mostly for research on brain function. But in the future, this might go to humans as well. So in 2002, a window of opportunity opened, and it was realized in 2005, only 3 years after that. And so this step two could have been an EIC Pathfinder project. Of course, EIC didn't exist at the time. Um, this wasn't funded by us under EIC, of course, but it's an example where step one would not be for Pathfinder. If you're doing biophysics work, okay, or biomarker development, for example, maybe this is more basic science and technology development, but the step two was technology development, and this could have been funded by us if we had existed at the time. This is the main message I wanted to convey to you. So let's go into, so that maybe hopefully gives you a bit of a better understanding of what I mean when I say, okay, Pathfinder is just for technology development. um, I wanted to add something to that. Another reason or another way you can look at this is we are providing 4 million euros as a grant, so this is non-dilutive, but it's only 4 million. And in medtech, as you know, you're competing with companies that are raising rounds at least sometimes 10 times or even 20 times bigger than that. So for us to make sure that um, 7, 8, or 9 projects that receive 4 million each really make a difference and they generate a core IP that's very unique and it's very valuable, you and we need to choose very carefully. We need to look for that window opportunity, like our colleagues realized in a different market, different area in 2002, 2005 with optogenetics. Of course, optogenetics is not for this call, but that's kind of the thing we're looking for. So the call we focus today is towards the healthcare continuum, technologies to support a radical shift from episodic to continuous healthcare. You have the multiple links in other presentations as well. You can go to our website to look at the work program. This is the key document to look at. You also have the challenge guide where we go deeper into the description of this challenge. So very briefly, what's the challenge about? Okay, so today, as you know, most healthcare is delivered in an episodic way. So it's symptom triggered. When you yourself as an individual discover a symptom, you have to gauge yourself the importance of that symptom. So in a way, individuals are implicitly entrusted with the responsibility to self-monitor and to trigger requests to the healthcare system. This is what I'm calling here the episodic approach to healthcare. Health Healthcare comes to you only occasionally, and typically you have to trigger it yourself. Of course, there are exceptions, and you will see those described in the call text and the challenge guide. Exceptions such are screening programs, but these are a small fraction of healthcare at the moment. So episodic reactive, the reactive model has obviously some economic advantages. Of course, if you have to have an MD by your side helping you daily, this is economically unviable. So at the moment we're living, we're accepting that an individual has to self-diagnose to some extent and then occasionally trigger a request for help. Now, the result of that, you can imagine, and you felt it yourself, as we all did, we miss sometimes signs of disease. And there is also an emotional burden sometimes, particularly for chronic diseases. If you suffer a chronic disease in the family, it's not just not very practical, it's just emotionally, very heavy burden on the family and the individual. Um, what if technology could accompany individuals in a non-obtrusive way, unobtrusively, so that we have technology around us embedded, worn, or implanted, which doesn't alter our daily life, but they are helping us to see what's important and then triggering healthcare. And then here, maybe we can combine the economic advantage of an episodic healthcare. So we don't have to have an MD, a human being by our side, which is not viable. But at the same time, we're not alone. Maybe technologies new technologies can help us do this. And I'm sure this rings familiar. This is kind of a different spin to some of the things we've seen already, but with a different angle. Um, So we've seen some examples, and in the challenge guide, you see some of these in the call text as well. For example, probably glucose measurement, glucose monitoring is one of the most successful examples where you have up to 10% of the population suffering from diabetes, so huge social impact. And still, until very recently, those patients had to self-monitor glucose levels very often every day and react with insulin in some cases. And so the technology that's wearable, partly implantable, or even now fully implantable that monitors insulin levels nowadays could be done continuously has changed the life of those patients. And this is happening right now. So there are some examples, but most healthcare is still episodic. You're still responsible for self-monitoring to a large extent. So I think it's fair to say that um, despite those examples, the full potential of continuous healthcare, of a continuous healthcare model, has not been fully realized. We need to see technologies with all the attributes of unobtrusiveness, maybe environment embedded, so sensors, systems around us, maybe body embedded, objects that we use in our daily lives could contribute to help us monitor our health status, home integrated, and so forth. But we need clinical grade reliability, and these have to be affordable. There are so many attributes that need to be combined so that we could migrate from this episodic to the continuous healthcare model. So one thing I wanted to avoid was to go into one specific example to avoid biasing you, because the way the call has been designed is we throw at you this big technological and social challenge, and we open the floor to you so you can go to any specific conditions or physiological parameters or biomarkers to monitor health status, and we don't want to narrow the scope of the conditions or physiology you can monitor. Of course, we are trying to maximize impact. You will see that in the evaluation criteria. I'll mention in a few slides. But in the challenge guide, I mentioned heart disease, cancer, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, cholesterol, hypertension, but also infectious diseases. Of course, COVID. We're all very aware of the need for better monitoring of acute but also chronic results of COVID and infectious disease. But I want to make this very clear, others are possible. The challenge guide are just offering you some examples to see what we have in mind, the spirit of the call, but we're not biasing you. We don't want to bias you. The other thing that's very important to remember is that we're looking for low TRL. So this is a very difficult balance again. In our example before with optogenetics, I was saying we don't want to do basic science because then we cannot go to market to the patient within a reasonable time frame. But at the same time, this is Pathfinder. If you remember the chain, this is the engine where you will invent core technologies. So this is for risk taking and low TRL. If you remember the example of the channel rhodopsin again, um, there was no, I mean, the risk was very high even after understanding phototaxis in algae. The risk was very high in developing the technology. It wasn't obvious that they would be successful in expressing channel rhodopsin in mammalian cells, so developing the viral vectors, in getting the light sources in place, getting to the target tissue. So many things could go wrong in the technological development phase, but it worked. So that's the kind of phase. You don't need to go to high TRLs, and this is particularly important for this call because we know that there is so much already in the market, from smartwatches to remote ECG. So we have to be very careful. We are not trying to refine existing products or existing technologies because honestly, with 4 million and those big rounds in this market, you cannot build enough value, core value for your startup if you focus on refining in a very competitive area. You have to find this narrow gap between not being basic science, but not just trying to refine and compete with large rounds in your space. We have to find that sweet spot. And it's very important that you submit your proposal only if you think you found that sweet spot, which is not easy. It's still low TRL. Again, I want to insist, this you will see in the call text. Proposals can aim at monitoring any family of conditions or a wider mix of health factors. We actually received some questions and some suggestions saying, well, do we need to focus on a condition, as in we need to have a cohort of patients, or this could be a health status monitoring technology that can tackle, it can be used by the wider population, even if there is no condition having been diagnosed. And this is the case. The call is open to monitor health factors, uh, broadly defined, even if there is no condition having been diagnosed so far. It's important that you believe, and that we believe, and the expert evaluators believe, that there is a possibility, there's a clear path for this to go to the clinic or to home use, to the end user. So you have to see that it's credible, that individuals will use it. And it's possible you want to involve relevant stakeholders from patient organizations, clinical experts. It's important that the project is not just a technology development by technologists, but it's a technology development by maybe multidisciplinary team. And in the team, you probably want to have a clinical side, or a patient organization side, or end user side, so that you are convinced, and we're all convinced, that this is going towards something that will be used, that will change the lives of you know individuals. Um, yes, in terms of technology, I also wanted to mention that you will see we are not confining you. So you're not confined, you're not constrained in terms of which conditions or health factors you tackle, and we don't want to confine you in terms of the technology. You will see in the challenge guide some descriptions of technology as examples. This could be ambient sensors, home use devices. Here we call them point of living testing, wearables, but also implantable devices. We got some questions about this. Is an implantable device a sufficiently non-obtrusive approach to healthcare? And we think in many cases it is. Clearly, for diabetes, a low-risk implantation procedure changes the life of an individual at very low risk, and it's an implantable device if it can provide glucose measurement continuously. And of course, if you expand that concept to other areas, of course, it probably makes sense to assume that this will be a low risk surgery for this implantable device. But if this implantable device can continuously generate, you know, not just single points of data, but long data sets in a hands-off manner for the individual, maybe a low-risk implantable device could be a solution. But of course, you know, sensors around the individual is also possible. Sensors embedded in objects which the individuals interact with, it's also a possibility. Wearable devices, again, there are many approaches. Yes, I just wanted to mention that it's possible to submit a proposal as a single applicant, although historically, and I think there's a bit of inertia in the community because of the past history of Pathfinder and the preceding FET, Future Emerging Technologies, most of our projects are executed by consortia. Still, it's possible for single applicants, and we don't bias against this model. Um, we don't bias our experts against single applicants. But it's true that you probably still see many projects with consortia executing them. So that's probably a fair description of what you will find. The criteria for evaluation, they have been mentioned before. There's an element of excellence, novelty, and alignment with the challenge, and plausibility of the methodology. This is always very important. We always ask our experts, do you think, of course, this is high risk, this is low TRL, but do you think this is plausible? Is this going to work? And is this novel? is this project at the right stage, the sweet spot we were describing, not basic science, not refinement of an existing device in the market. Still, remember, this could be a product in the market for which you've discovered an opportunity for a new feature. So don't feel constrained. The sweet spot, the idea that an existing product is not right for this call, please do not take that idea as a dogma, because maybe an existing product with an extremely novel feature could make an entire new uh, market and a big new solution for individuals. So this could perfectly be an approach to this call. The second criterion is impact. And of course, we ask our experts, how big an impact is this technology likely to produce? First part of the first criterion was about excellence, novelty. Is this technology impressive and credible? Second is, okay, if it works, will it impact society? And finally, how is this consortium or individual applicant work plan being organized? Do you believe, we ask the experts, do you believe that this is an efficient, well-designed work plan to execute what they want to do? I wanted to mention as well with this slide this additional layer that is very unique in the agency, and it's only applicable to challenges. This is the portfolio level evaluation. So once your proposal gets scored by our experts, then there is a panel where the panel looks at the rank the ranking of proposals. And what we try to do here is we try to look for mistakes in a way. What do I mean by this? So we look at the entire cohort of top projects. We actually look at all the proposals, but mostly at the top ones. And we ask ourselves the question, and you will see this in the challenge guide described. Okay, is this set optimal, or are we making any mistakes here? And as you will see in the challenge guide, what we do is we label the proposals, all of them, with medical condition being addressed or health factors, more broadly defined, type of technology proposed, and barriers tackled. And we looked at 7 barriers that we thought sometimes could hurdle the real application of this migration from episodic to continuous healthcare. Sometimes invasiveness is a problem. Um, so if you need to extract samples that are not easy to obtain, of course, an extreme case could be CSF, cerebrospinal fluid. This is a very extreme case. Of course, plasma is much easier, but it still is very obtrusive. So this typically is a problem, invasiveness. How about false positives? Because we've seen in many technologies that uh, if a specificity is not good enough, in the end, a particular screening procedure cannot be used because there are so many false positives that it creates a bigger burden in the healthcare system that we actually try to solve. Um, if it's an implantable sensor, um, what's the operational lifespan? Because as you know, sensors have many problems when they go beyond a few months of operation, like surface fouling, where the sensor stops working properly and you need to replace the sensor. So that might make the solution not viable. Um, what about multiplexing? So is this technology only looking at one particular marker or a family of markers? Because in some cases, the experts might think, well, if this single marker changes the life of many people, or it has a dramatic impact on mortality or morbidity, for example, is enough. But then, of course, it's also very good if you have many markers, each one of us playing a small role, but as a set, those markers have a tremendous impact on the individual's life. So maybe for some cases, you might want to have multiplex technologies. User compliance. How likely is the user to stick to this technology? Barrier 6, need for human intervention. Do we need the individual to stop the daily activities, perform a measurement, and then continue? Because that might affect compliance, which is barrier 5, and simply people might reject it. So the impact might eventually be very low. Um, Another potential barrier is attention to gender-dependent symptoms. We've seen cases where female-male differences are not considered fully in the course of disease or the approach to diagnosis. Um, well, has this been considered in the design of the project? Because if it hasn't, it's unlikely to have a tremendous impact in society if it doesn't consider gender differences. So what we do in this final round step of evaluation is we label the proposals with these categories: medical condition tackled, type of technology, and barriers covered. And then we use this to make sure that we're not tackling the same medical condition twice with the same technology. And if there is a tie between different proposals, we look very carefully at the barriers. How many barriers are covered by these two different proposals that seem very similar in other aspects? So we use this barrier to kind of untie that situation to help the experts in the panel choose what's the final ranking. So this is a final additional check, trying to discover situations where common sense would tell us this is not an optimal um, portfolio to be funded. This is the last stage. Typically, we would expect these situations not to happen, but this additional layer helps us make sure we can correct these problems if they occur at the end of the evaluation. Finally, the specific objective here is a device or an instrument or a full system that offers unobtrusive, proactive healthcare. Ideally, lifelong health status monitoring with some elements of predictive medicine, of course, so that this is not just monitoring some parameters. Um, it's capable of triggering a red flag and inviting you to reach out to healthcare practitioners or even to do this in an autonomous way for you. Remember again, the end objective is a POC, is a proof of concept. So at the end of Pathfinder and in your work plan, you should plan to have at the end of those 2, 3, or 4 years, this is flexible, this is up to you, but at the end you should plan to have a proof of concept system that you can test and use and show to experts. And then ideally, as soon as possible, we should help you transition to the next stage in our funding pipeline. If you remember, that's transition with the additional 2.5 million to move quickly to accelerator and move it to market. Remember also that it's important to consider health technology assessment methodology. So as you know, there is this trend towards using HTA to decide whether a CE mark technology is actually reimbursed. And the trend is to make these decisions systematic and to make this more or less consistent, harmonized within the European Union. So when you design a technology and you describe it in your proposal, please take into consideration that for this to be really useful and reach the end user, there must be an assessment that demonstrates quantitatively that the cost versus return in terms of health improvement for the individual is clear, because otherwise the trend towards HTA can make your technology, which might work to some extent, but might make it not reimbursable in the future. So in the end, it doesn't impact our lives, because at the HTA level, authorities or at the European level, it's seen as there is not a good trade-off between cost and return in clinical terms, or risk and return in clinical terms. Finally, it's a good idea if you think about how this technology can be integrated in the real healthcare system, because the experts will be asked by us, make sure that once this is funded and they succeed and we push it quickly to transition, that there is a plan, that there is a workflow in healthcare that can accept this technology, because if it clashes with the workflow in a way that makes it unpractical, it will never be used. So look at technology assessment, HTA, and look at the workflow in the healthcare system to make sure you explain how this will be used. Finally, deadline, you have that in the work program, 19th of October. Um, just a quick refresher on the budget. We have 167 million for the 6 challenges. So approximately for each challenge, we will have around 30 million 28 million euros. So we expect to be supporting 6, 7, 8, possibly even 9 projects. The budget is a bit flexible, so we might get a little bit more budget perhaps, and then we could go up to 9 projects. Typically project size, well, you see the 4 million figure appearing here and there. This, I think that the trend should be towards common sense. So the dimension of the project should match what you want to do. Operationally, it's easier for us to have projects in a few million kind of bracket. If they are too small, they're difficult to manage and evaluate by us. So typically, 3 or 4 million euros is manageable in terms of the operational cost for us to evaluate. But please focus on requesting the budget that you need to get the technology done in the time frame you propose. So if it's less than 4 million, it's less. If it's a bit more, you can also justify it. But the goal is to get the technology to the patient as soon as possible. So please design the budget not to match this maximum amount, but to match what's needed. Otherwise, our message to the evaluators and your approach to the proposal clashes, and this becomes very obvious. And that's it. Again, links there. You can find the links in the other presentations and on our website. And that's it.
Thank you very much, Enrique. So we start with the question. Maybe I will try to share my screen here with the Slido. Okay. So the first question is, one of the specific objectives refer to the health technology assessment at HTA methodology. Could you provide more details on the HTA? What do you expect?
Yes. Again, the idea is just common sense, really. During the proposal, make sure you explain from an HTA perspective, what does that mean from HTA perspective? So there will be a cost associated with implementation of your technological approach. And you have to explain somewhere in the proposal that the cost clearly offsets the advantages generated by your technology, because we know that the reimbursement in the future very soon, and some of this is already happening at the moment, will depend on this quantitative evaluation of cost versus return. Also, as I was saying before, risk versus clinical return. So it's not just a matter of, please do compare in the proposal the cost versus the return that can be generated, but also the risk for the individual compared to the return, the clinical advantages for the individuals. For example, if there's an implantable device being considered, there will always be some risk in the implantation. This could be an infection risk, for example. So you have to rationalize. We believe that clinicians will recommend to at least a subset of the population to use this technology, because although there is a minor risk in the implantation, the advantage offsets that risk. That's kind of the HTA line of thought that it would be useful if you could describe somewhere in the proposal.
Okay, thank you. So we move to the next one. Early involvement of clinical practitioner and patient association is recommended. Should one interpret this as such stakeholders should join the consortium?
No, you're absolutely free to design the consortium or non-consortium the way you think best fits your target. We don't constrain you, and this is not sort of a politically correct statement. And there is no bias in my mind, and I will not convey any bias to the experts. The question is this team or individual beneficiary designing the project in the most optimal and most credible way? And this might involve having stakeholders from the patient organization side, or clinicians participating as advisors, beneficiaries, non-beneficiaries, colleagues who will participate at some level of the execution, absorb within some work packages. It's up to you. We're not forcing you to give them any particular status as beneficiaries. That's not necessary.
Thank you, Enrique. So the next one, if you have a product that is already at TRL above 4, but you want to adapt it, expand it, use it in new populations, can you still apply for this challenge?
Yes, why not? I was when we were designing this call, The obvious things come to mind, smartwatches, remote ECG. We've seen so much activity in this space, remote ECG, and some big, even acquisitions and some big rounds. So it comes to mind. And my thought was, well, with only 4 million euros for a challenge, you probably don't want to use this to refine an existing, uh, you know, remote ECG technology or a smartwatch. However, if you have a new feature with a new approach that really makes a huge difference, of course, for you as a startup, in terms of market access, but also for the patient or for the individual, if that additional feature makes a huge difference and it's clearly novel and it gives you unique competitive advantage, why not? This could be added to an existing product. And in fact, if you look at it just from the angle of common sense, it might actually make it easier for you and for the patient to get access to that new feature if it's part of a product that's already close to being used. So I'm not biased against or in favor. I will not convey any bias in that sense to the experts. It's up to you.
Thank you. So next one, we need to show safety and performance while minimizing false positives. Our clinical trials are must. Are we okay with ex vivo studies without in vivo?
Again, it's up to you. Um, the way this will work, as you can imagine, is you will be competing with other projects, and we're not forcing anyone to do clinical validation at this stage. But if somebody does it, because it's possible, the technology allows it, um, it always helps. So it depends on what you're trying to develop. If you need to do clinical but cannot be done in Pathfinder, but you can do preclinical, and the critical advantage of what you're developing suggests, okay, you have to devote those 4 million euros to the preclinical work. You cannot do clinical, but if it works, the return for society will be so impactful. Go ahead and submit that, because that's the kind of common sense approach we'll transfer to the experts. We do not force anybody to do clinical validation in Pathfinder. It, it often is very difficult to do that in Pathfinder because you start at very low TRLs, but sometimes it's possible. So up to you.
Thank you. Next one, how IP know-how conflict of interest will be managed in portfolio. Portfolio CA to be signed. There would be around 7 projects, so up to 30 partners.
Yes. Isabella, do not hesitate if there is some question that you feel, because some of this may
Yeah,
be the contract negotiation. So in general, what we would expect is that the approach to IP management makes sense. So if you have multiple partners and the IP is going to be generated by multiple partners, in reality, in real life, you will have to have some kind of agreement in place at some point, but probably you might not need it at the Pathfinder level, because the technology is not there yet. Maybe you want to describe that 2 or 3 critical partners will own some of the IP, and there will have to be some kind of agreement between them to exploit that IP in the future. Or maybe because of the history of the project, there is already some agreement already in place. Maybe there is some licensing already in place. So we
uh,
don't expect you. Sorry, go ahead.
Enrique, I think here the question is about the interaction between different projects in the same portfolio. So I think the
Oh,
IP issue relates, I mean, there are the standard IP rules applying to the projects, so no
yes,
exception. And,
yes. Oh,
so,
I see.
yeah, you see what
I see.
the question is a bit different. Yeah.
I see at the level of portfolio, you're right.
Yeah.
Thanks for the clarification. So, yeah, I don't know whether the question came from the angle of, are we forced to share IP with other projects inside the
I guess.
portfolio? Okay. No, 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 no. Of course not.
Yeah.
Of course not. We try to find synergies within the portfolio to your advantage, but you're not forced to share any IP within the portfolio. The portfolio is there just first for us as an agency. If we look at the group as a group, maybe we get closer to our target. And second, maybe we find synergies within the group. But we don't force you to exchange core IP at all. No, no.
Yeah.
Do you want to add
Thank you.
anything, Isabella? Thanks for the clarification. I
No,
kind
no,
of
I
guessed you
think
probably
that
saw
was the
better the.
question. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yes,
So,
thank you.
So the next question is, can a spin-off company be the coordinator here? They have the main technology that will be further improved. So I
I
guess
think
I can
so.
take it.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, sure, sure.
Yes, as soon as they are eligible and they meet the eligibility criteria as for the work program, so they are based in Europe or associated country, then yes, they can be coordinators. Yes, then does EIC plan events or digital portal to encourage interactions between engineers, medical doctors, and researchers to build consortium?
I don't think we are planning
N- No, I think that
specific
no.
activity.
I think you can find partners using the facility in the Horizon Europe platform, but
Mhm.
we don't help you in finding partner
Yes,
directly at the EIC level.
yes. It's a good suggestion though to consider in the future, no, Isabel? I mean, maybe even our community platform might be used for that, but at the moment, this is not something we have implemented.
Why not? Yeah.
Yes.
Uh, then then we have already answered this. Can a spin-off company be the coordinator? Yes, this we have already answered. Then, in which part of the proposal the barriers mentioned in the challenge guide should be included and how?
Yeah. Again, there is maximum flexibility here. I mean, sometimes we see proposals having a small table sort of specifying because it helps the evaluators if you say, so barrier one, we tackle it because you explain it there, barrier two, barrier four, sometime, but this is completely flexible. You
Yeah.
might prefer to have this mentioned in the text. No, Isabella, I mean,
Yes. So if I may add, so the first evaluation criteria is how well the proposal meets the objectives. And just bear in mind that the first evaluation criteria has more weight than the others. So of course you can also comment in the impact, the number of barriers that are tackled, but
absolutely.
yes, it's really up to you. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a very important comment. Yes, Isabella, because um, the barriers have been used so far, and this is what we have in mind at the moment to untie proposals in the final ranking. So the first thing, the first criterion, the biggest weight, as Isabella was saying, is this proposal matching the challenges in the call? And that's a critical thing. The barrier is kind of secondary. It's good that you describe it, but it's not the primary thing. Very good. Thanks for mentioning this. This is critical. Yes.
Okay, then the next one, how can you reconcile the low TRL expectation with HTA that usually refer to very high TRLs?
Yeah. Yeah. This just one very quick example. If somebody's thinking about an implantable device that's bulky, that you will need several cubic centimeters of device implanted, the implantation is tricky, the positioning is tricky. Um, Maybe the cost of the device will also be high. Then you need to compare that to the kind of physiological parameters that will be measured with the device. Maybe a silly example, if you like, if the device is measuring blood pressure and it's bulky, expensive, and risky to implant, maybe the alternatives, even if these are cuff-based blood pressure measurements, or maybe if we have in the horizon smartwatches doing non-cuff-based uh, pressure measurements in the future, those competing technologies will make it unlikely that from a technology assessment perspective, a reimbursement part in the future would accept that implantable to be used. So you have to make your case from the reimbursement perspective. Yes, this device makes sense from the HTA angle. Maybe this implantable device is sort of an aberrant case, but it's pretty obvious. You wouldn't expect this to be reimbursed, this huge implantable device, high risk, just to measure blood pressure.
Thank you. So the next one, shall we be receiving these presentations by email or through the portal? Thanks. Yes, so the presentations and the recording, as well as a compilation of the Q&A that we have will be available in our website and will be transmitted to you. Then, being a single entity submission, is it possible also to submit as two entities? If so, what are the rules for these entities to be eligible? I'm not sure this question is very clear to me. So
Not
maybe
sure I
if you can
understand.
rephrase it, we can come back later. Do you understand the question, Enrique?
Mm, no, I'm not sure.
Okay, so maybe the person who asked this question can a bit rephrase it and clarify. Then we like to propose novel transdermal imaging system, which would be not obtrusive but non-personal, based in clinic, operated by physician. Is that okay to grant?
Well, it's a little bit at the edge of the scope, no? Because the idea is to have technology around us continuously monitoring us, so that can be embedded in our daily life. Whereas if it's used by a physician, it's kind of a diagnostic or monitoring tool that adds to the existing tool set in the clinic, but it doesn't really go towards the non-episodic healthcare. Now, you still need to approach the physician, which still retains our model of episodic healthcare. So I think it's at the edge. If you want to um, approach that target, maybe you want to focus more on how this is going to help going from episodic to continuous healthcare. Maybe that's the way to approach it, to make it more within a scope. Otherwise, it doesn't really solve the episodic to continuous healthcare, but you can maybe take a different angle and find applications to focus on our target.
Thank you. So next one, how important is that the proposed tool is personal and operated by patient? Could it be a novel tool helping with diagnosis non-invasively but based in clinic?
Yeah, it's similar to the previous
Yeah,
question. Uh, Again, the closer you are to solving the key target, which is ditching the um, episodic approach to healthcare, where you need to diagnose yourself and trigger help, and you need to focus and you need to get stressed a little bit about your health status. You need to become a bit of a doctor in a way. The more we can go, the more your proposal helps us go away from that model, the more it is in scope. So if it's only used by physicians, well, it probably doesn't solve completely, but it's at the edge. You probably should move more towards our main goal.
yes, thank you. Then, can an organization participate in more than one proposal in this topic, of course, with different technologies, disease, etc.? Yes,
I think so.
yes, they can. You can, consortia, I mean, you cannot duplicate your submission, your the same proposal, of course, but you can participate to different consortia and different proposal. Yes. Next one. Would a newly developed technology with the potential for being applied to new challenge areas fit into this challenge?
I'm not sure.
Yeah.
To new challenge areas. How do you read the question, Isabella?
It's very vague, so I would encourage the person who wrote it to rephrase it and resubmit it
Please.
because
Yes.
it's not very clear to us. So, how is the participation from a Swiss or UK company seen? Would EIC found project whose IP can be exploited by non-EU companies? So of course, any legal entity, even if not based in Europe, an associated country, is eligible, can participate, and they have to meet the requirements as per the grant agreement regarding the IP. However, Swiss or UK legal entities are not automatically eligible for funding. They might receive exceptionally funding if judge essential during the evaluation. Yes, so I think we have answered to this. Then, is at home use mandatory for the end user solution, or would a technology which supports the continuum approach at clinic level also be eligible?
Yeah, I think we tackled that question before. It's at the
Yes,
edge. Yes,
yeah,
it's borderline.
yes. How would you define clinical grade reliability when the TRL is up to 4?
Yeah, no, this is a very good question. Now, the only thing we try to do at Pathfinder level is to ask you to focus on making sure that if you do preclinical work, that there is a clear indication that this technology will be useful later on. And this, of course, is difficult to do at low TRLs. The message we convey to evaluators is, do you really believe this technology will work and will be used? And so if you do data analysis and you design, for example, an algorithm, make sure the design of the architecture of this deep learning algorithm, for example, it's compatible with a clinical grade approach in the future. Uh, if you need a material that and you plan to use non-medical grade material, which of course it's natural thing to do, particularly in academia, for example, it's good if you mention that there is a path to changing from that medical grade, non-medical grade material to medical grade material, and this change in material will not dramatically increase the risk, the technological risk of moving the technology to the market. So just having this, taking this into consideration and maybe mentioning this in the work plan. If you're looking at a non-silicon, a not medical grade silicon, because you want to do some quick production, quick prototyping, it's fine. But then we probably want to mention you can go to medical grade silicon without a major problem in scalability in production, for example. And then the evaluator realizes you're considering that this will work even when you change to medical grade, and the whole thing will become clinical grade.
Thank you. So this is again about the HTA. I think you have answered already, but maybe you can briefly repeat. Should we involve an HTA official body as a partner, or a university covering this okay to provide a methodology?
Yeah. No, not needed to have an HTA only partner. This is an element. It would be useful if you consider in the proposal and you mention it, and the experts, the evaluators see you've considered this angle, the pros and cons, so that it can be eventually reimbursed. But you don't need to have an HTA focused partner, the consortium.
Thank you. Apart from wearable device able to perform continuous monitoring, would it be useful to have a drug delivery module to develop a closer loop sensing or delivery?
Could be. In the context of diabetes, of course, this is a major um, improvement where you have closed loop sensor and insulin pump, and this is a trend. The call was mostly focused on monitoring. So how is the trigger for health request executed? Is it done by the patient, or can it be done autonomously so the patient is free? So, but for some conditions where the system can not just sense but also provide therapy of execute a therapeutic action, this seems to me that adds value, but it also adds complexity. So you need to find this balance. If you try to do too much and you go a lot into the therapeutic aspect, so maybe you defocus a little bit. But if you can remain focused on the main target of the call and still add a therapeutic action, well, that's fantastic for the individual. You're not just discovering something is going wrong without the individual having to pay attention himself or herself, but you're also providing a therapeutic action in addition to maybe raising a red flag for the clinician to intervene. So why not? But you have to balance the risk you introduce if you add the therapeutic aspect.
Thank you. Oh, I just remove actually a question, which is maybe we will be answering in written, because then will there be an opportunity for rebuttal to first comments from the evaluators before the final evaluation, as is the case for the Pathfinder Open? No, I don't think it's foreseen this in the challenge. So we normally don't foresee rebuttal phase.
I don't think there's a specific
Uh,
reason for this, Isabella. No, I think the rebuttal is kind of a new thing,
yes,
and we're experimenting with this in the open. But maybe in the future, this could be
yes,
expanded, but not for this
exactly.
call.
Yeah. Then, can one proposal be based on a medical solution that monitors a disease on a periodical way and not a continuum one?
Yeah, of course. If this, um, periodical measurement as opposed to fully continuous is optimal um, to approach the problem. Why not? Why do you want to have? In many cases, you don't need continuous. This makes me think about diabetes again, which I remember the HbA1c control of diabetes, which doesn't have to be continuously performed. So it probably wouldn't make any sense to try to do HbA1c continuous measurement when you don't need that to be done every single second. So of course, you need to match the granularity of the data, the sampling frequency to the particular problem you're targeting. So it's up to you depending on your goals.
Thank you. So I have a technology for biomarkers identification for disease A, and I have a proof that it could be relevant in disease B. Is this relevant in EIC challenges?
Perfectly fine. Yes, um, this could be an interesting approach to de-risk a little bit your path. So you could have these biomarkers well understood for disease A, and you have some indication for the first time that they can be useful for disease family B. Probably we try to avoid using the Pathfinder to do the basic research around new biomarkers because it just seems that the time required to develop a full biomarker and understand the physiology behind it, it might not be compatible with the time frame we have in the agency that we focus very much on product development. But if you can reuse some knowledge already available for those biomarkers and some recent scientific data that links the biomarker to a new disease family, why not? This could be the core of an opportunity. Maybe that's a sweet spot for your particular space. Why not?
Thank you. Then are gender-specific conditions equally eligible, e.g. prostate or breast conditions?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes some conditions are gender specific, and we all understand that. That doesn't mean that they should not be covered. But for the cases where the condition is applies, it's applicable, but it's modulated by gender factors, here we would consider it a mistake not to consider those gender factors. But of course, if there are conditions that are gender specific, we want to cover those as well. Maybe if we saw the entire portfolio focusing on just gender specific conditions, then maybe this wouldn't be optimal either. Um, but the opposite probably wouldn't be the case either. So yeah, we would consider them as well. These are within scope.
Thank you. Maybe a project of home hospitalization suitable for this goal?
Well, if the focus, well, why not? Because for some subset of the population, bringing to the home some aspects of medical care that could be diagnosis, follow up, or even some therapeutics in the context of a chronic disease, maybe that's a shift, a clear shift from episodic to continuous healthcare and relieving the patient from self-monitoring, for example. Yeah, maybe that could be within scope. Yes.
So is this in scope? Diabetes therapy with rare reservoir exchange by an implanted system, continuous glucose monitoring, micropump, concentrated insulin reservoir.
Yeah, why not?
Yeah.
Yes.
Considering the call budget for this topic, around 7-8 projects will be funded. If portfolios are built, how many of these portfolio can be assembled? Uh, no.
Just
So
one. I mean, there was a
yeah,
misunderstanding.
exactly. So basically, all projects that will be funded under this call will be part of the portfolio.
Yes.
So whether there are 8, 7, 8, or even 9, maybe.
Yes.
In the case of a consortium including a university and a startup, is there any advantage to have the university leading the proposal instead of the startup?
No. No. No.
No. Can the consortium in this challenge include 2 members instead 1 or 3? I think that this is a specific condition in the work program, and yes, it's possible to have the so-called small consortia, meaning 2 applicants. If the proposal is good but fails to be granted at this Pathfinder challenge, would that help somehow to apply for Pathfinder Open later? I
They're
think
not connected, no, Isabel. I think there is no
that's
connection
no,
between.
no. This is really up to you. Yeah,
Mm. You can try open in another cutoff, but there is no connection. We don't label this proposal
yeah,
as having a good score in challenge and then we channel it to open.
yeah.
This is not in place.
So you start from scratch in another call. Yeah.
Mm.
So that's what. So if we propose a system based on novel vision technology, how much of our focus should be to explain why we do not choose other similar commonplace technologies?
Yeah. This should be like common sense. It's like if you approach an investor for an early stage seed investment and you say, I need 4 million to develop this vision system. And the investor will ask, okay, but why don't you use other technologies, not a vision system? So you need to provide a rationale. I think it makes sense. Um, yeah, I think this is part of the excellence. You will see the experts will evaluate this under excellence. They will read
Yeah,
your strategy and they will say, okay, it makes sense to focus on vision because it wouldn't work with a different kind of sensor. I think you need to rationalize it.
thank you. So if a screening and monitoring technology has been tried unsuccessfully in the past but can be significantly improved via recent development, is it low TRL?
In my mind, yes. If it doesn't work, it hasn't worked in the past, but you found a solution um, with a new, based on new scientific data, and you see an opportunity, that sweet spot again. Of course, I suppose that the person who's asking the question is thinking, well, if I bring up the same topics again, the experts might think, oh, this team is focusing on the old problem, and of course, you have to make a special effort to explain very clearly you have discovered a new approach based on a recent discovery so that the experts realize there is something new. You're not trying the same old things that failed in the past. So this is a bit of a small challenge for those writing these kind of proposals. I understand that. But in my mind, this is perfectly doable. And if you explain it well, the experts should realize there is a lot of value in solving an old problem with a newer strategy.
Okay, thank you. Then, can you explain more what portfolio within this category needs to be addressed in the sketch? Not clear.
Yeah, there's only one portfolio. Maybe I didn't explain
Yes,
this
i-
portfolio very well, but there's only one portfolio. All the projects funded under this call will belong to one portfolio.
yeah. What are the eligibility conditions for two members can be from the same country? So I don't want to say something wrong. You should refer to the work program or to the previous presentation. Anyway, we will be answering in written to all these questions, and I prefer to wait before saying something wrong. So the expected final TRL is 4, but activities in the proposal that foresee some tests with real users are eligible.
Yes, of course. This always adds. Our approach is again similar to what an investor would think, because in the end, your technology will be moved on to transition and to accelerator. At least that's the vision we have in our mind. So if you have, the sooner you have some data demonstrating that it's safe and it's functionally adequate, the better. So if it's possible, of course, yes.
Then one of the tasks would concern an atypical phenomenon that we observed in a previous small clinical trial, but if successful, there will be a chance of a high risk, high gain discovery. What about budget costs if we don't experience it for a second time?
Mm, that's a tricky question. So I understand, if I understand the question correctly, they're saying we need to do a small test which doesn't require those 4 million, and we could realize there is no, that we don't get the effect that we wanted. And so what do we do with the rest of the budget? Is that your reading as well,
I
Isabella?
think it's also related to the second question, which is if we are unlucky to retest in patients, will we have to refund the money?
Oh, okay.
No, I mean, when we, it's, I mean, if the project is let's say, selected for funding, it becomes a grant, and then it's high risk again. So if justified and if well managed, we can live with the risk that it doesn't really meet the final results. However, I think the balance between risk will be judged in the evaluation phase, and especially in excellence and impact. So if it's too risky, maybe, I don't know, depends the way the proposal is written, but if it's
Hmm.
too risky, then
Yes.
maybe it won't be deemed suitable for funding.
Yes, it's a very good question, no? Because we don't have this scheme where
Yeah.
you can request a very small amount just to test the idea and then go for the full thing. Um, this may be something we can think in the future, no? Because situations like this make sense, but we don't have that structure in place. So you have to go for the full thing, or maybe test the idea under a different program, maybe with national resources, and then go for the big attempt once you've demonstrated. We don't have this like two-stage
Yeah.
approach. No?
Then will this challenge also be based in building a portfolio of similar approaches, or more in the line of diversifying as much as possible?
Um, so the categories I described, which are in the challenge guide, medical condition, technology tackle, and then the barriers. Mostly when we thought about this was to try to avoid excessive focus on just one technology. The idea was not to try the same thing again 5 times or 3 times. That was the main thought. So diversify a little bit the risk we're taking by taking different angles towards uh, the same target problem. So that's what we try to do at the portfolio level. Try to avoid what if we have two proposals trying to do the same thing on the same condition, the same technology, and we see they are so similar, or three of them. So maybe we should prioritize, and then we use the barriers to prioritize. That's kind of the approach we plan to take for the portfolio.
Yeah. Last one, in the portfolio evaluation of medical condition and technology, would you try to diversify, or we look, so that's the same,
Yes.
rephrased. So
Yes.
I guess we have answered this as well. So, right, I think we are a bit out of time, but we managed to answer to all questions, hopefully. Uh, so I don't know if you have any additional one. So if so, just type it fast. Yes, another one. Hard technology transfer from other fields and optimize with possible IPs considered breakthrough.
Why not? Yes. A sensor that has been used in a different context. You think of an application in a clinical context or in a healthcare context, and it can be a revolution. But you have to be very realistic in the way experts will see this. If the sensor has been around an industry for a number of years, typically it's strange that nobody has thought, okay, could I use this sensor in a healthcare context? Uh, yeah, this makes me think of ultrasound, for example, where you have ultrasound sensors in a context, and then you could think this could be used in a clinical imaging context. You have to make sure the sweet spot is there and it's credible, because otherwise, if the technology has been around in a different application, then the experts might say this is known, it's been tried before. So you have to make sure there's an opportunity and you demonstrate it's a new opportunity. But yes, it's possible.
Thank you, Enrique. So I think we have reached the end
Thanks so much, everybody, and
of
especially
our
you, Isabella, for all the help.
presentation. Uh, Thanks to you, Enrique, for this very interesting and clear presentation of the challenge. So just to remind you that you will receive the recording of this presentation, as well as the Q&A session. So if there are questions that were not completely answered or didn't appear, then they will be answered afterwards. Okay, so I think we can close the meeting. Thank you all, and
Thank you,
we
everyone.
wish you good luck with your proposal.
Bye bye,
Bye.
everyone.